Have you ever stopped to think about how the English spoken in London, Lagos, and Lahore can sound so completely different? It's all technically English, right? But it's been shaped by culture, by history, and by millions of conversations. So how on earth do you even start to make a map of all that diversity? Well, today we're going to dig into a really famous and, pretty controversial attempt to do just that. It's a fantastic question, isn't it? How did this one language branch out into so many unique varieties all over the globe? To get a handle on it, you really need a map. And for decades, the go-to map was one created by a brilliant linguist named Braj Kachru.
So here's our game plan. First, we'll set the stage. Then, we'll dive right into Kachru's three circles model itself. After that, we'll look at the big criticisms. The cracks in the model. We'll touch on some new ways people are trying to redraw the map. And finally, we're going to ask, why does this old model still matter so much today?
Let's just start with this one simple fact. There is no single English. The language you'd hear in a business meeting in Singapore and the one you'd hear on a street in Dublin, they're just worlds apart. English has soaked up the local colors of every culture that's taken it on. Okay, so how do you bring order to all that chaos? Back in the 1980s, the linguist Braj Kachru decided to tackle that very challenge. He came up with a map to chart the global spread of English, and his model was so simple, so elegant, that it basically shaped how we talked about this stuff for decades. And this is it. This is Kachru's three-circle model. It's a really powerful visual for understanding how English spread. And the genius of it is that it's not about how many people speak English, but about how a country got the language and what role it plays in that society. First up, you have the inner circle. This is the historical heartland, you could say. We're talking about countries where English is the main native language, like the UK, the US, Canada, Australia. Kachru called these places norm-providing, because traditionally, they set the rules. They're the ones who wrote the dictionaries and the grammar books that everyone else followed. Next, we have the outer circle. These are countries, many with a colonial past, where English is an essential second language. It's used in government, in the courts, in schools. Think of places like India, Nigeria, or Singapore. And Kachru called these norm-developing because they weren't just mimicking the inner circle. No, they were creating their own unique standards, their own vocabulary, their own way of doing things. And finally, there's the big one, the expanding circle. This pretty much covers the rest of the globe. Countries like China, Japan, Germany, places where English is learned as a foreign language, mostly to communicate internationally for business, science, or travel. And because of that, they were seen as norm-dependent. They looked to the inner circle to see what correct English was supposed to be. Okay, so Kachru's model was neat and tidy, but this is where we start to see the cracks. For decades, these circles were the definitive map. But as the world got smaller and more connected, people started to realize that this clean map, it just didn't match the messy reality of global English anymore. And the critiques started getting pretty sharp. As one academic, Paul Bruthiaux, put it, the model was in danger of concealing more than it reveals. The worry was that by trying to keep things simple, the model was actually hiding how complex things had really become. So, what are the big problems? Well, for one, the model is all about geography and history, not how well someone actually speaks the language. And those neat lines between the circles, they're incredibly blurry now. Plus, that term inner circle kind of suggests a hierarchy, right? Like there's a superior center. And maybe the biggest issue, it totally ignores individual skill. A superfluent speaker in Sweden might know English way better than a casual speaker in an outer circle country, but the model just has no way to show that. And what's the number one reason for all this blurring? You guessed it, globalization and the internet. English isn't just spreading from the center out anymore. It's a web, it's a network where a user in, say, the expanding circle is bumping into dozens of different Englishes every single day, not just the standard ones from the inner circle. I mean, think about it. What about a student in Germany who grew up online, watches all their shows in English, and chats with friends from all over the world in English every day? Are they really just a norm-dependent learner? Kachru's model doesn't really have a box for them to fit in. So if we look at our map of circles again, we have to see it differently now. The borders are totally porous. People and the way they use language just flow between these circles. It's less like three separate rings and more like a big, messy Venn diagram with huge overlaps. All of these problems led, logically, to our next section, redrawing the map. Linguists started saying, okay, We need new models that actually show the complex reality of English as it's used today.
Now, we're not going to get lost in all the academic details here, but these new models all share one big idea. Instead of organizing the world by country, they focus on the speaker's skill. They argue that an expert user of English in Japan is actually more central to the language than a native speaker in the US who barely uses it. It was a simple but radical shift, from geography to proficiency. Which brings us to our final section, why the circles matter. You might be thinking, okay, if the model is so outdated, why did we just spend all this time on it? And that's a fair question. The answer is its legacy is massively important.
Here's the bottom line. Before Kachru, there wasn't a simple, clear way to even talk about the different roles English played around the world. He gave us that first map and a shared vocabulary. And the fact that the map is outdated now, that's not a failure. It's actually proof of just how incredibly fast the reality of English is changing. So the real takeaway is this. The model's true value today is in the debate it sparked. By trying to put Englishes into boxes, it forced us all to ask some really huge questions. Like, who actually owns English? Who gets to decide what the standards are? And how is the language we speak tied to our identity?
And that leaves us with this final thought to chew on. As English becomes less the property of its native speakers and more of a shared global tool, that question, who gets to decide what's correct, becomes more complicated and, frankly, more important than ever before.